So now into my final 2 points. I am very much anti-minimum wage, which makes people very upset on a pretty frequent basis, but I'll
Hmm.
explain why. But I am pro UBI. And the
Interesting.
reason why is because minimum wage creates a lot of adverse effects that UBI does not create.
Mhm.
Um, so, for example, and I'll try not to get too jargony with the econ stuff because a
I'll
lot of conservatives make a
get
lot of
jargony because
very
I'll put in I'll put in show notes too that define certain things and all that kind of
that
stuff
would
too.
that would be great.
Mm.
So, a lot of conservatives make a lot of really bad arguments for minimum wage, and it clouds my argument a lot of the time, and that bothers me. And it's basically like, oh well, you just should work harder, pull up by your bootstraps. The people before you weren't complaining. What's another one? Prices are going to increase, which is a secondary effect, but not a primary effect. The primary effect of minimum wage is that it increases unemployment, and that is my main concern with it.
Mhm.
So, pretty much if you were to take, a supply and demand type thing, consider the demand people that are looking for laborers, right? And then the supply is the labor that's being provided, right? So, you know, there's McDonald's is looking for X number of workers at X price, and there's so many people that are willing to supply it at that price, and you reach, in theory, some form of equilibrium, and that kind of sets the wage, right?
Mhm.
So minimum wage in that context is what would be considered a price floor, which means that it's setting the price and saying you can't go beneath that price, right?
Mhm.
If that price floor is below that equilibrium amount, it's not going to have an effect on anything, which is actually what I'd argue our current minimum wage is the federal minimum wage, of whatever it is, 7.50 an hour or
Yeah.
7.25 an hour. That's well below, I think, our standard equilibrium at this point. 1% of adults currently working are working at the federal minimum wage. Everybody else is above that. I mean, and even
Yeah.
if you go and look at starting wages at McDonald's or Panda
In
Express.
California, minimum wage is I think 12.50 now, give or
Yeah,
take. Yeah.
and I mean, Michigan's is I think only 9.50, but
Mhm.
the starting wages at places like McDonald's are still $13, $14 an hour. But I'll get
Mhm.
into explaining why that price floor, if it goes above equilibrium, you get what would be considered a surplus of labor. Now, if you think about a surplus at like a Costco and you have too much of something, they're going to lower the price to try to get rid of it, right? Okay,
Right.
we have too much of what people want of this item, and the only way that we're going to get rid of it is to lower the price so that more people than usual would buy it, right?
Mhm.
But we made that illegal. You made lowering your price illegal. So
Mhm.
that surplus of labor is really just a different word for increased unemployment. And
Interesting.
um, there's a lot of discussions to be had, and there's a lot of studies that go one way or another.
Mhm.
And that's because obviously life is complicated, and not that one size fits all principle isn't going
Right.
to work everywhere. But
Totally.
I would say you can still visualize that better if you take the wage argument to an extreme. It
Mhm.
becomes very obvious what that's going to create if you say make the minimum wage $40 an hour. Then that
Right.
unemployment law that we think about becomes so obvious. You're not going to
Mhm.
have everybody working at $40 an hour. You're going to have some people working at $40 an hour and everybody else without a job.
Right.
And the Congressional Budget Committee for this most recent minimum wage proposal said exactly that. 900,000 people were going to get a raise out of the situation, and
Mhm.
1.5 million people were going to lose their jobs. That was the
Mm.
projection, right?
Mm.
And that's because, Birmingham, Alabama is probably not going to be a place that has a $15 minimum wage anytime
No.
soon, because the
Yeah.
cost of living there is totally different than living in New York.
Right.
Now, to move that conversation into UBI,
Mhm.
UBI is not setting a price floor. If
Mhm.
I am getting $1,000 a month, I can still go and choose to sell my labor for $9 an hour if I choose to, right?
Right.
So this creates a lot of good things, right? Minimum wage usually helps corporations and hurts small businesses. That's why Jeff Bezos is a supporter of minimum wage, just because he
Mhm.
knows it's going to murder his retail competition that are already struggling, and he's going to have the power to pay his workers $15 an hour, right?
Absolutely.
Um, but UBI doesn't cause that. UBI actually gives people more leverage with their wages because they can be like, I don't need you that bad. I don't need
Right.
you for my insurance. I don't need you to feed my family because I'm getting $1,000 a month from the source that I will
Absolutely.
have no matter what.
Mhm.
So you're either going to pay me what I feel like I'm worth, or I'm going to walk and go somewhere else. It's one
Totally.
great thing.
Mhm.
Another great thing is all research on UBI so far suggests that things are spent on economically valuable causes, right? This idea that if you supply people with welfare, they're going to go and get hooked on drugs and alcohol and not work a job to save their life is, first of all, it's a really stupid perception that people have.
Right.
But second of all, the data shows that's not the case. People
Most
will use
people
the
hooked
money.
on drugs. Most